This is like some cutting edge stuff. I've been like searching all week so far for like a YouTube video that actually covers like a modern look of consciousness. I knew 179 views. I knew that was it. I knew that was going to be the one.
And it turns out it's really quite fascinating. These different parts of this cell, the top of the tree and the roots of the tree, receive completely different streams of input. The kind of sensory inputs that you receive from the world, they're going to be much more likely to hit those bottom parts of the tree, whereas your expectations about what would happen actually project to the top parts of the tree. And when those two parts interact, you actually get a really, really different effect in your brain. This big burst firing of this cell, it just goes absolutely bananas. And it turns out that spiking that you see in the cell when these two streams interact actually coincides with your conscious experience of a stimulus. So what Matthew's done, which I think is really fascinating, is that he's shown that multiple different types of anesthetic drugs actually block the ability for that expectation and the evidence to match together. And you basically block the ability for this cell to respond in that really big bursty way to those coincident inputs. And the reason this is really, really exciting is it suggests that irrespective of which anesthetic agent you use, a way to block an animal's ability to actually combine context with input actually can, turn on and off conscious experience in a really physical way.
I'm curious if these dendrites are effectively circuits in some sense, or if they're just collecting charge. Like I'm wondering if there's any logic in the exact structure of the dendrite, because dendrites they're taking in inhibitory signals as well as excitatory signals. Once those clash, it affects either the neuron firing or not firing. But yeah, does that I guess I wonder, is the logic there? I'd imagine it happens in the nucleus. Does any quote unquote logic happen within a neuron's dendrites, or is it all happening within the cell, the nucleus? I know they model dendrites with circuit type elements. A mutual friend of ours was going to study this. Oh, nice. Inhibitory signals, excitatory signals can be thought of like gains, perhaps. Yeah, once again, this is why I think the analog system, it's not even a metaphor, just that perspective, it really works here. Yes, some logic does indeed happen within dendrites. It's not all centralized in the nucleus. The nucleus handles gene expression and long-term regulation, for example, making new proteins, but moment-to-moment information processing, what we might analogize to computation or logic, occurs largely in the dendrites and axon hillock. Dendrites are the neuron's main input structures. They receive synaptic inputs, neurotransmitters released from other neurons on thousands of tiny spines. Each of these synapses changes the local membrane voltage slightly. These signals are not merely summed linearly. Dendrites have voltage-gated ion channels and can perform nonlinear operations, things that resemble logical and or not combinations in simple models. Wow. For example, if two nearby synapses fire together, the resulting depolarization can trigger a dendritic spike, greatly amplifying the signal, a kind of coincidence detection, and inputs on separate branches may not interact at all, a form of spatial gating. And then some dendritic regions inhibit others, a form of local knot operations. So in modern computational neuroscience, dendrites are seen as active nonlinear computational subunits, not passive wires. Nice. Where the output logic happens. The output of these local computations spread toward the axon hillock, the region that decides whether to fire an action potential. Okay. The hillock integrates and weighs all incoming dendritic signals and executes an all or nothing threshold function. The most basic logic gate in a neuron, right? So the decision's pretty much already been made by the time it's... actually, I shouldn't say that. Like, half the decision's already been made, and then half of it is whether or not there has been enough stuff that comes through that it reaches the threshold where it's like, boom. Sounds like a mixed signal system. Mixed signal system. Systems integrate both analog and digital circuitry into a single chip or within a single system to allow for interactions between the continuous analog world and discrete digital processors. I guess, yeah, I'm wondering where you're finding the digital here. in this case, it's you could think of these as functionally and or not, but really what's happening at each of these stages are chemical reactions where charge is literally canceling things out. It's acting in such a way that you'd expect a digital and or not gate to act, but it's not exactly that. I imagine I imagine it's messy in such a way where perhaps different dendrites come through to a gate, and it's effectively a not gate, but a little bit gets through. Right, digital from the logical expressions likely. Right, yeah. The way I see this is it's quite messy in what's actually happening at the most granular level. It's literally just neurotransmitters carrying charge. These things are having chemical reactions. I mean, granted, I don't know the chemistry well enough. The next thing I want to know is what he means when he says that the singular neuron is taking in stimulus information or stimuli information as well as expectation information. I heard James MacShine mention that a singular neuron can take in both stimuli information and expectation information simultaneously, which can affect rapid bursts of action potentials. I'm guessing that what occurred here is complex logic within the dendrites. I didn't quite realize that dendritic systems were so complex that they could both take in complex signals like these and handle all of this sophisticated logic, determining which combinations should affect such rapid large bursts. Okay, let's unpack this carefully, because what you're describing touches on one of the most exciting frontiers in neuroscience, how single neurons can integrate different streams of information, sensory versus expectation, or bottom up versus top down, through dendritic computations. What James MacShine is describing, Shine and others have shown that single cortical pyramidal neurons, especially in the cortex and thalamus, can simultaneously receive bottom-up sensory inputs arriving on basal dendrites near the soma, cell body, top-down predictive or contextual input arriving on the long dendritic tree that reaches toward the cortical surface. Man, yeah, so these dendrites are so long. When both arrive together, these signals can interact non-linearly in the dendrites, so not just add up, but trigger special events like calcium spikes or NMDA spikes that dramatically boost output firing. The mechanism, dendritic logic and coincidence detection, you can think of this as logic happening inside the dendrite when sensory input, bottom up, is active, but the top-down input is quiet, modest firing, or maybe none. When expectation input, top down, is active, but sensory input is absent, no strong effect, prediction without confirmation. When both inputs coincide, the dendrite generates a local calcium spike that massively depolarizes the soma, leads to burst firing. That burst is a decision that both bottom up and evidence and top down expectation align. Okay, so we also have to ask if this is what the predictive processing people are leveraging. Does Anil Seth and Andy Clark, do they leverage these findings when building a predictive processing perspective? Is this essentially outstanding evidence for a predictive processing framework perspective? Why dendrites can do this? Dendrites aren't just cables, they're semi-independent processors. A single large pyramidal neuron can have dozens of dendritic subcompartments, each with local voltage-gated calcium or NMDA receptor dynamics, independent excitability, the ability to produce dendritic spikes that may or may not propagate to the soma. These subcompartments can perform distinct computations in parallel, combining or gating different streams of input. The neuron as a whole is then more like a small two-layer network than a single logic unit. Something that's interesting seems to be the time variant nonlinear nature. If these dendrites carry a signal, the next time they carry the signal will be different, I imagine, stronger. I think that's the other thing. It's constantly activation is affecting the strength of synapses. It involves both affecting the axons and the dendrites. So yeah, it's insane. It's like not only do we have these circuits, but these circuits are changing over time, constantly, and that's also an analog system. So it's ridiculously complicated. Like it's so complex. And then the thing that I learned recently is that like when a neuron fires, if it fires a bunch in quick succession, in quick enough succession, it undergoes like a phase transition to a more excitable state, which it allows its propensity to fire to be higher. And when we look at state space in a brain, so like the information that's like flowing, it's like main driver is which neurons are in that excited state. So yeah, the thing it was so embarrassing. The thing I learned this morning is that like when you look at I think it's an EEG, like when you look at those scans of the brain, you see a loop going. I always thought that was the action potential. Like that was all the different neurons firing to the next one, and like that's the loop. But really, it's the excitability that's creating those electric fields which show up, but that isn't necessarily like in line with specific action potentials. Now, obviously, when a neuron is in that excited state, it's going to be firing off action potentials much more rapidly. But that doesn't mean that a neuron that isn't in that state isn't firing. It just means that like that's kind of keeping the rhythm of a bunch of neurons firing. That blew me away just because I just didn't expect that level of orchestration. So I am going to include that in the video because I think it's really important. But we have to keep it accessible. I'm trying to keep it as accessible as possible while still going into this state space stuff. Yeah. What was funny is that Hank Green had like a video on language models or AI. Yeah, and he's got a thumbnail that says "This is Alchemy." On ChatGPT isn't smart. It's something weirder. When literally our brain is alchemy. Like our brain is just straight up chemistry. So I don't know what he means by that. Why that would be particularly apt, but it's Hank Green, so he can do no wrong. What do we got? The large rapid bursts, yep. And I imagine large rapid bursts I'd imagine they almost immediately affect which neurons have that phase transition. They affect the field potential. I'm glad I don't have to go deeper than this. Granted, I keep going deeper, but I don't think I have to go deeper than this to learn the functional aspects of the brain. Except now I'm learning about dendrite dynamics, so who knows? I'm probably overlooking something. Yeah, so the other crazy thing is neuromodulators. So like neurotransmitters they're going from one neuron to the other, right, through dendrites and then out through the axons. But at the same time, certain parts of the brain are literally like releasing neuromodulators, which are pretty much the same thing. Like a lot of them are also neurotransmitters, but they're just not now traveling from neuron to neuron. They're being like released diffusely, and they're affecting the excitability of neurons in that proximity. So like you've got another dynamic that's affecting this whole system. So it's just absolutely bonkers. These bursts are energetically expensive but highly informative, often driving downstream neurons in synchronized networks. In other words, the neuron isn't just relaying information, it's computing the relationship between expectation and sensation in real time. So I just assumed that logic happened only in broad neuron systems, but I guess it's happening within a neuron as well. How much logic would you say is happening within the dendrite versus across neurons? Because there's logic in both ways, so it's very difficult to figure this one out. Expectation minus sensation equals error signal. The conceptual leap. You're right to be surprised. It's a profound shift from the old neuron as a simple adder model. Current understanding suggests that a single cortical neuron can perform complex, context-sensitive, hierarchical logic operations, thanks to the nonlinear and compartmentalized properties of its dendrites. That's why some scientists talk about neurons as microprocessors, AO, or multi-input integrative units, rather than simple threshold gates. An error signal is used to drive feedback networks classically. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm curious if that mirrors or matches onto the predictive processing folk who do talk about prediction error as some sort of error signal. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, let's take this in steps because you've raised two related but conceptually distinct issues. Where the logic actually happens within versus across neurons. So it's not where, but how much is happening. I'm curious just like where most of the logic is happening. How this dovetails with predictive processing theories from people like Anil Seth and Andy Clark. How much logic happens within dendrites versus across neurons. A good way to think about this is as a nested hierarchy of computation. Dendritic branch slash compartment. This is tens of microns. That's the spatial scale. Wow. Mechanism, nonlinear local integration. The type of logic would be fine-grained sub-symbolic logic. Coincidence detection, gating, subunit computations. Right, but I want to know functionally what kind of logic. Whole neurons, the summation and threshold at soma slash axon hillock. Because really the dendrite is tackling the very last bit of logic that could take place for the neuron. Otherwise, you're talking about more large-scale logic dynamics. But here, it's like, you know, multiple neurons are affecting inputs for this neuron. So the type of logic would be neuron level decision, spike slash no spike, temporal. Okay, so this is talking mechanistically the type of logic. I'm trying to ask what type of logic functionally. The microcircuit, dozens slash hundreds of neurons. This is recurrent connectivity, inhibition slash excitation balance. Because yeah, like a neuron could be operating for a microcircuit here as specifically like inhibitory because it has downstream neurons, or it could, you know, obviously operate as excitatory. Pattern competition, oscillation, state transitions, and then network slash population, long range recurrent loops, feedback slash feed forward, global dynamics, attractors, inference over state space. Brain also doesn't seem clocked in any digital sequential sense. Yeah, how does clocking work with digital systems? What does that concept mean? Clocked in a sense that like a CPU it's running at a certain rate. I guess that's what it would mean, right? And then you overclock. Okay, yeah. Like so, I mean, I guess weirdly the brain ends up with the same frequencies. Like my brain and your brain are probably firing in the same frequencies. I think that's the case, right? Don't brains just follow like gamma, alpha, beta frequencies? My brain, yeah, that's why I said ours together. We're like at a. I'm not saying ours are the same as everyone else's. I'm just saying ours are the same at a higher level, you know. All right, I'm gonna have to finish this thought process tomorrow morning. I've been literally every day I've been waking up and just learning about the brain. So I'm kind of going crazy at this point.